This episode, for reference, because we're going to be dealing with topics that change rather quickly, has been recorded on Friday, the 8th of August, 2025, just for a point of reference. Where do we see the Ukraine conflict, if not ending, heading? And also in relation to the end of things, every dictator finds their end.
Yeah.
And he can't live forever.
No.
Is there a retirement plan? and then you described him as capo di capi, so it's just like, the mafia boss. Traditionally, they go out in a box.
Yeah. Well, on that note, and then I'll come back to Ukraine. I think it's a bit of pop arithmetic, but I sometimes just offer people a perception of the number of people in the history of Russia and the Soviet Union who've left the top job alive. and you ask the people...
If you don't have an expiry date,
there you go.
So you
ask people, so give me some names. And look...
Mikhail Gorbachev?
Well, 4.
Yeah.
So Nicholas II, who abdicated the throne and was then murdered by the Bolsheviks. But he abdicated the throne and was replaced by a provisional government.
Technically.
Nikita Khrushchev was removed by the party and lived out his retirement in a dacha, not troubling anybody and not being particularly troubled. Mikhail Gorbachev, who ran out of country to run, and Boris Yeltsin, who handed the reins over to Vladimir Putin.
Yeah.
Now, there might have been a point at which Putin thought he was setting up the framework to be able to step to one side, perhaps a bit like Lee Kuan Yew, become sort of senior minister, prime minister emeritus, Nazarbayev in Kazakhstan, sort of perhaps thinking of creating a new post. And there was a lot of speculation at one point about how Putin might construct a new entity that would ultimately have a veto over sort of presidential appointments and so on. So while he would step away from the day-to-day nitty-gritty, he would still de facto exercise strong influence. I think Navalny's Anti-Corruption Foundation video that exposed the huge palace at Gelendzhik on the Black Sea coast, which I think there was no doubt that was being built with skimmed money for Putin. And of course, the exposés around Dmitry Medvedev. And there was plenty of stuff that the Navalny team produced that was documented. It wasn't just fake news. This, I think, has probably now been aggravated by this belief that the system needs Putin. And I don't think he has any plans to retire. So what happens when he dies? Well, perhaps... if you're thinking about sudden demise, a more telling question is what happens if Zelensky suddenly dies in relation to the Ukraine war. But I think if Putin dies, the system is such that while there might be adjustments, that fundamental siloed caste system of the oligarchies, the securitocracy, so the intelligence and security sort of associated and affiliated barons, and then the technocrats who actually run the government, the only person who straddles all three of those is Vladimir Putin. So if you're an oligarch, you tend not to have a prominent position in one of the other silos. And if you've seen the film Death of Stalin, it's a little bit, again, pop psychology, but I reckon that scene where they're all racing and jockeying because what they don't want is that bastard to get the top job, there'll be a bit of that. Now, there's always speculation about whether the oligarchs will unite and overthrow Putin because he's costing the economy too much, he's costing them too much. I mean, the first person over the bags will find that no man's land can be a pretty lonely place. With me, fellas. And this is where I think we saw Prigozhin come the cropper, because suddenly you saw just how exposed you were when you broke cover. So I don't think Putin plans to go anywhere, but there is a lot of writing by thoughtful and authoritative and connected people, Russians in exile, who are identifying how he is manoeuvring the sons and to a certain extent daughters of the old guard into positions of authority. So deputy prime ministers, ministers, people who are invested in the system. But by manoeuvring them, you're also showing fealty to the old guard. You're buying their sort of continued loyalty and acquiescence because you're looking after the offspring. And I think we see that pattern in other countries, and we've seen that pattern in history. So creating that framework where perhaps there will actually be the stability which allows people to say the system will continue and we'll tweak it. It may very well usher in an opportunity for a dialing back of war in Ukraine, but given the ethnic genocide and cleansing that's been practiced in Crimea, in Donbass, etc., firstly, there's no reason to believe Russia will suddenly have a, oh my God, what were we thinking moment and hand back and withdraw from Ukraine.
Well, they've Russified those.
They've Russified those. And even if Ukraine were able militarily to recover those territories, you're dealing with a very different profile culturally and politically of the population that's there. I mean, Ukrainians who still reside in those areas have been compelled to become Russian citizens because they've been denied access to government services, in some cases to utilities, to medical care, unless they have a Russian passport. So there's been this systematized Russification, including the kidnapping of Ukrainian children and the inculcation of a very Russia-centric view.
Which is setting up for the next generation. And so there will be, I think, if conflict is frozen, which is probably the best outcome, most likely outcome, not the best, but the most likely outcome we'll see, because Russia, while it is grinding forwards, has not been able to strike a decisive blow to finish off Ukraine, nor has Ukraine been able or politically willing to mobilize enough young people. And by now, it's a bit like the Western Front of the First World War. You have very heavily fortified positions. You'll make incursions. But ultimately, what we've seen with the loosening of constraints in the last period of the Biden administration on Ukraine being able to use Western-supplied weapons to strike into Russia, not civilian targets, although they're obviously causing chaos at airports, but to go after the staging posts from which death is being delivered to Ukrainian civilians, the fuel dumps, the ammunition depots, the airfields, the extraordinarily sophisticated and well-executed strike on the Tupolev 95 strategic nuclear bombers, the idea that we can bring this war to Russia. But it's not Ukraine that invaded Russia. Russia invaded Ukraine. And I think as long as Ukrainians are politically and personally willing to fight and die for their sovereignty and their independence, it's not for any external party to say, no, you must stop that. The question is, what can we best do? And I think it is enabling Ukraine to continue that fight in practical terms, but also, I think, finding those avenues that will increase the pressure upon Russia. And to that extent, I think bringing pressure to bear upon countries that are conniving and colluding with Russia by enabling the sale of oil and gas.
So is that something Trump by accident got right, or has he taken advice?
Well, he hasn't done anything about it as yet. I mean, he signed an executive order at the time we are speaking to impose additional 25% tariffs on India to take effect on the 27th of August, 10 days after a potential meeting with Putin. And I can well imagine that meeting will deliver enough to allow Trump to declare success, and we'll ease sanctions and I'll rescind those tariffs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's far more pertinent, I think, that we look at how to raise the costs for Russia in the near term economically, but that is not going to suddenly bring about the Kremlin going, what were we thinking? No. But people say sanctions are ineffectual. Well, there's a lot of writing to suggest that they're not. I mean, the central bank interest rate in Russia until a month or so ago was 21%. Mortgage rates are very high. Wages are high.
So everybody feels the pain.
Everybody is feeling pain, although I know from contacts that the restaurants are full in Moscow. Prices are up. The roads are getting less attention, so investment is being diverted. But there are not people sort of queuing for bread. No. And this has been part of how Putin has preserved the passivity. Yeah. And I think there is also a natural tendency on the part of a population that's heard for a very long time, you're a pack of bastards, to just say, well, where do you get off?
Yeah.
And so I think there is a genuine sort of rallying around the idea of, well, we should stand up for our own rights, backed by a bit of that sort of, well, I'm not sure why we're in Ukraine, but the president's a smart guy, and I'm sure we wouldn't be there if he didn't think there was a good reason. So you have all of these things coming into play, but I think we need to ensure that Ukraine, at the very least, can staunch further Russian ingress.
Yes.
And we need to find the levers that will make Russia stop visiting death by long-range missile strikes and glide bombs and drone attacks.